Good afternoon to the CIES, Centre International d'Études du Sport webinar number 12. So don't forget, first of all, that you have the possibility to post some question if you want. The topic of today is a very important one in the moment. It's the centrality of sport in the fight against discrimination across the Americas. We have decided to touch this issue today, asking some of our former graduates, four of our FIFA Master graduates, one of them being as well CIES Network graduate. So I would like to start introducing our members, but before connect, it's important if you need to do that, and you can subscribe to the webinars and see our former ones as well. So let's introduce our four guest speakers. I will start from their edition of the FIFA Master. So we'll start with Ghebresellassie. Eden is a US American, but she was before Italian, from Eritrean parents, and she was an alumni of the FIFA Master in the 11th edition, and she lives in New York for almost 20 years now, in various countries, in various capacities. Eden, how are you? Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
And so our second guest speaker is Neikelle Moore. Neikelle is an alumni from the 11th edition of the FIFA Master, and she lives in Washington, D.C. at the moment. Well, she's from Trinidad and Tobago origin and lives in the US from her childhood. And she has been working after the FIFA Master for quite a time with the NBA, and now works in another company. We will see it later. How are you, Nikki?
Fantastic. Nice
Great.
to be here.
Great to have you here today. Our third guest is Kiomari López. Kio did the FIFA Master on the 17th edition, and Kio is from Puerto Rico, and she's currently in Dublin. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm in Dublin for the summer. Thank you very much for having me here. Hope everyone's doing well. Yes,
thank you very much, Kio, and we'll see in a few minutes. And our last one, Geoffrey Edwards, is a recent graduate. He was graduate on the 19th edition of the FIFA Master, and before that, he did our course with the University of West Indies in the CIES diploma, and he's actually as well our coordinator in Trinidad now. Geoffrey, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, it's a pleasure for us to have you all four here. Well, you know, today's debate will be really focusing on the impact of sport in the crisis, and not focusing exactly only on the United States, but what's the problem in the Americas has been about the importance and the impact of sport in the fight against discrimination. It's a serious matter, but I think you all have a way to see it that is very important to make clear to our audience and to the debate. On one hand, how much sport has been essential in the current debate about fighting for the rights. I mean that other people matter, and it's not just a question of one group that focuses. But on the other hand, how much some of the visible non-racist behavior are just staying on the surface, and our sports show that many of the deep racism still is there, and discrimination is still there as well in sport, when on some ways, if we see American sports, basketball, football or others, the impression of a really mixed participation and non-discriminatory policy is not really working. I would like to ask you first, what is at the moment, in your point of view, the impact of sports in what has happened in the recent weeks in the United States and a bit outside as well? How would you believe in this fight the sporting element has been essential? Would you consider it has been essential? It has been visible in the current crisis?
I can start off. Personally, I do think it's essential. I do think it's a platform. It's a platform for athletes to speak out. It's not only a platform for athletes to speak out, but it's a platform for administrators who work in the sports field to speak out. Maybe there hasn't been enough. I do believe more needs to be done. More athletes needs to speak out. More people, CEOs, administrators, everyone in the staff room needs to speak out. And I do think sport has always had the ability to try to bring people together, and more should be done to help this. But I do think it's one of the most important platforms, if not the most important platform, to help change things, to help change people's minds, to make them see what others are going through, and to make everyone work at it. Because we all need to do something about it. It just can't be a few people. It has to be everyone. I don't know what my colleagues think here.
Yeah.
Racial, if I may, racial inequality, gender equity, gender orientation, ethnic education, and disability are all forms of discrimination that affects sports, global sports. With, in my opinion, racial inequality, also known as racism, being the most prominent. Race is a global phenomenon, or is it a social construct? With the horrendous death of George Floyd, it reignited this debate. And once again, we have seen where sports can be used as an opportunity to save us. It has always been, since Jesse Owens coming up, sport has always been used to be able to fight social justice, and in some quarters, social injustice. We have a saying in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean: if your neighbor house is on fire, wet yours. And we are speaking about the Americas here. The United States of America is on fire, whether it be literal or hypothetical. We in the Caribbean and other countries, the globe needs to wet their houses, and sport is a good water, a good agent to help to stop the blaze.
So if I may answer, I think that a key word that is missing is if sports is important. And I think Geoffrey mentioned Jesse Owens, and then we have other examples like Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We have more recently, Colin Kaepernick and LeBron James and so on. The one thing that all of them have in common is that they're all Black athletes, and they all, have done their part. And I think that the beautiful thing that has happened in this new Black Lives Matter movement is that the new narrative has been that now, you have to be anti-racist if you want to be an ally, and that has to come from white people. And so the words white privilege and white fragility have been part of the conversation and in the forefront of it. So to answer your question, yes, sports has a huge impact, and it can be global because majority of these athletes are legends at this point, but we need white people to speak up. We need white athletes. We need the white people in charge, as Kyo was saying, the white executives, the white referees. And a good example is last year, before the George Floyd, incident happened, or murder happened, and this whole Black Lives Movement started. Kevin, I can never know how to pronounce his last name, but he's a basketball player in the NBA, and his name is Kevin Korver. and he wrote
Kyle.
sorry, yes, thank you. And he wrote a beautiful article for the Players Tribune where he describes his relationship with one of his Black players, Kevin being a white NBA player. And the thing that was shocking for everyone and for me as well while I was reading it is that he admits that even though he had lunch with this guy, spent 24/7 like human time with him, he still had biases against him when he was arrested by the police for no reason, and he was hurt and he was out for the whole season. And inside of his brain, even though he knew him, he knew his character, he knew he was a good person, he was like, well, in his mind, he thought, well, if the police stopped you, you must have done something. So that was huge for me. And I wasn't even offended by him admitting it, because I thought that for a white person to admit such a dark thought, it shows the biases that we all live under. It doesn't matter how well as Black people or POC we perform, there's always going to be biases against us. And white people can decide to either admit it or not, but it is. So yes, sports is very important, but it's even more important when white people do the same work as us, and hopefully one day even harder, because we are tired.
I think sports has been important both in its presence as well as its absence right now. I think that when the coronavirus hit and we had lockdown, I was actually pretty okay with the idea that sports would be shut down, which is interesting from a professional and job standpoint. But I think that we had been ignorant and inconsiderate of each other for a very long time, and really needed to sit in our corners and have a period of time to reflect. And I think that everyone has had that chance, and that's including all the athletes and the players and staff and coaches. And what has come and emerged out of that is that everyone individually now, from spending that level of time with themselves and being able to see what is going on around them, and especially the athletes here in the US, have become even more active because they have had that time to reflect. They have had that time to process. They have had that time to see it without any distractions. And that's top to bottom. I often say, I wonder if we would even be here if The Last Dance, the Bulls championship run, very focused on Michael Jordan, was maybe 1 week later. The series had finished the weekend before both Amy Cooper, George Floyd, and there was actually 4 incidents that weekend, but we don't need to get into that. Before that, and the entire nation was enthralled. Without distractions, however, it feels as though everyone has been able to find their sense of what power and what levers they can actually effectuate, as well as taking the risks to do that, because every powerful entity is back on its heels. Every organization, every CEO, every billionaire, everyone has lost at some rate during this period. And now you're understanding the crux of what my role is in that. And it's been promising, of course, both from an athlete perspective, seeing how some leagues that have wanted to come out, by the way, NASCAR might be new for everyone, but they've wanted to expand diversity at a degree and a clip that maybe they didn't feel they had a moment to do that. And now you're seeing that they can accelerate that. The question, however, though, isn't going to be what's happening now, but what will be the sustained and continued lifelong learning, improvement, and action that happens and comes out of this. So, definitely see a moment of hope here. I think that it's very important to stay grounded in the midst of it, and to understand that sports, both in its appearance, its presence, its athletes, and its platform, as well as in its absence for the regular man to not have those distractions, has been pivotal in this moment.
Absolutely fascinating, your answer, Neikelle. And it brings me to the first question. I had to ask something, but we have a question from Ken McHugh, one of our regular speakers at the FIFA Master in Leicester. Hi, Ken, first of all. And Ken is asking, FIFA is the only sports body that has human rights strategy. why is there no pressure on the other international sports association to follow and suit?
If I may answer that question, good day to Ken as well, a friend of Futsal 868. First and foremost is because many persons don't know. In doing the research last year as regards to intersex and transgender discrimination and looking at regulations of international federations, we found that even along that line, many international federations didn't even know what they had or didn't have. So internally and externally, there needs to be education. But that also leads me to a very important point. Rule 50 of the Olympic Charter, and in particular 50.2, demonstrates, is based on demonstration and propaganda, should be removed and displaced totally. From an article that I read, it is consistent with the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, where free expression during ceremonies, for example, should be allowed. Why am I mentioning this? Because in our opinion and learning from school, looking at the pyramid of sport, the IOC is one of the leading organizations. And yet you find that the principles of Olympism, which includes educational values of good example and social responsibility, is lacking. Thus, constitutions, rules, regulations, and statutes need to speak to it. So I totally agree with Ken that there needs to be some pressure. But if it is we look at others, there's a problem.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add on this element? I have some answer to I put myself in the discussion. The white man is there as well. One of the elements probably that is essential is the fact that the participation of sportsperson on the field is not absolutely matched by the figures. If we look at the president of federations, if we look at the club chairman, at the doctors, at the finance director, head of marketing, head of strategy, head of communication, the male white preserve is what happens in sports. And if you see the representation of the top directors of the international federations, that's largely white middle class men from the traditional world. And sport has to change, because the risk is to give a wrong image that sport is very open, while some aspect of it are not. And it's very similar to education in some ways. And I think there is a lot to be done. Let's continue with another issue that
if I may, piggyback on what you just said to answer this question.
You may.
So specifically, this webinar, it's about discrimination, right? It's about what's going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement in America. And the question is about FIFA. So when you say human rights, I'm not sure if that specifically, it's a department that handles the rights for Black people or non-whites. And if it does, I'm not sure, I have seen the results of it. For example, our panelist and colleague here, Nikki, shared a Kevin Prince Boateng article in the Players Tribune, which is very recent. And he speaks about that after, years of him being abused as a player on the field and even off the field, FIFA started a group to stop racism. And after a couple of years, nothing was done, and they kind of dismantled it. And they said, we did our part. So another key word that has been used a lot during this movement is performative allyship. So to me, that feels very performative, meaning they're doing it to look good. They're doing it to sound good and to say that they tried, but that's not how you tackle the issue. You tackle the issue by, first, like I always say, you humble yourself, kind of like Kevin, the NBA player, did, and you admit what actually the problem is. Then you educate yourself, and then you start working towards a solution with the people that have been affected by it. And like you said, Pierre, by having so many white male in charge, that's very difficult to have a diverse of opinion for people to be able to sit down and learn from those that are affected from it. And a great example, even though it's not perfect, is the CEO of the NFL, that finally, by simply him, after years of denial of Colin Kaepernick and kind of like not speaking on it, by simply him, such a powerful man and respected man, saying Black Lives Matter and we stand with you, the white NFL players start speaking up on behalf of their players. So imagine you are in a team and you're not heard, but you still have to perform. So now these Black players, I think they're going to have even more incentive to perform on the field because they feel heard and they feel validated. Sometimes we are at a point where we've been suffering so much that even validation, it's enough at times. And so to answer about FIFA, I don't think that FIFA has done the work that I just described in any of the steps, and nonetheless, any of the other international teams. If I have to rank them in order, I think the NBA has been leading since before George Floyd. And correct me if I'm wrong, Neikelle. I know I'm talking about from the surface at least. And then, now the NFL, but it's tough. I haven't seen it done the way it's supposed to, and I've spoken to some athletes as well, and there's a lot of frustration out there.
If I may add to that, another point that I think is very important is that you can't act once everything has happened. You can't just sanction a club just because there was racism. I think it all has to start from the very beginning, educating the players, sit them down in a locker room and get them to talk to each other. Get the white players to talk to the Black players. Ask them what they've gone through. Ask them their opinions. How can they change? How can they help? Because if you always do when everything has happened and you just give them fines, nothing will ever change. They're rich. They're going to pay their fines. You need to start from the very beginning, even when you're little kids in the locker rooms, even when you're international team flying out to a different country. Tell them what they're going to expect. Tell them what's different. And then I believe once you start getting that conversation going, things will change. Because nothing will ever change if you just find a club or any organization. They all have the money to do it. And they all have ways to get around it. And I believe education and talking about it like we're doing, it's very important.
I agree with you, Kio, but I also think, and we had this conversation yesterday, where let's go back to Colin. If all of the Black players from the NFL had stepped off or stopped playing the game, what would have happened to the NFL, the entire league? And Prince Botan, the same article that you mentioned, Eden, it clearly showed that the entire team walked off the field, as well as his captain when the referee came into the locker room, said, if Prince is not playing, we are not going on the field. So it takes a collective effort, noting that, again, from the pyramid of sport, players are the majority. If players stand up, not how much years after, which we're seeing in the United States of America right now, if those same said players had stood up with Colin, imagine how the conversation would have changed. And let's be frank. If this 10-day wonder ends next month, next year, the situation is going to happen again. So players, both Black and white, have to stand up. And we can't just look towards just the executives, because at the end of the day, if players not on the field, then there's no sport.
Yeah. I mean, a few things. I would definitely, I agree with everything that everyone said. I would add, I know I'm not looking, I can't see you all, but I know I'm sitting in front of a group of people that can affect action, right? And so we get back to the point of what's on the books versus what is actually implemented. And in that sense, if you have a human rights policy, whatever it is, I have not read it, I do not know what it says, but in effect, it is not shown, it's not seen, it is not demonstrated, and it's not followed through, then it is simply checking the box. I would say that performative is certainly going to be dependent on what are the results at the end of the day. Because I think a lot of what we might get caught in is what's happening right now while the moment is hot. What is a protest if the protest is approved? When you now come out and say, oh, you know what, it's okay to kneel. What is that protest today? So I would just always say that as we evaluate these things, we look at not only what they're saying and what is being performed at the moment, but ensure that we have a timeline before we're handing out grades as to who's actually really making a difference in a change. So it's great that someone has a human rights policy. What does that actually look like? From an action perspective, it may in fact be you sitting internally at your organization saying, hey, look, I would like us to just take a quick look at where we stand, because a lot of times it starts from the jump off point of where you are. Do I have a human rights policy? What's the makeup of my organization? Who are my suppliers? Is it a diverse set of suppliers? You know, it may be that you're the one internally that has to ask that question. If you need a sense of kind of how to get to that point of looking to draw people into their credibility, right? Go, I would say, check out, there's an organization or an initiative called Pull Up for Change right now. And it's essentially letting companies say, hey, look, we may have fallen flat, but here's our plan, right? We're finally now doing like we do with every business problem. Something emerges, we look at it, we turn all our resources and we say, everyone's gonna focus on this right now. We've done a quick study, here's where we are right now, here's our plan going forward to address whatever gaps we have. So I would definitely point you to Pull Up for Change. I would also tell you to take the moment as well to understand that you as where you may have thought you did not have power before, you as an employee now, you as an administrative side person, actually have quite a bit of power at this time to say and pull on some cords. At the NFL, as Eden said, the ending message was quite inspirational for the players. But how did they get to that message? It was a rogue set of employees that decided to team up with players and to draw out a message from the NFL to be both express, equivocal, and explicit about the idea that they are entirely against discrimination of any kind. And now it's time to measure that for them. So if you're that employee that ends up pulling that cord, congratulations. You may actually be able to both try it and get away with it in the moment. But more importantly, from a perspective of lifelong learning and not being just performative, but demonstrative and becoming part of the culture, that's also, you know, something to be measured, watched, and then evaluated, not just giving the NBA a thumbs up from the jump because of their past laurels and because they may actually be skating on what their athletes are doing right now. And everyone associates the NBA with its athletes. But what are the team owners doing? What is ownership groups doing? What are the different organizations doing to affect the change that they supposedly have on paper?
Yeah, one of the problem of sports is if we look at the surface, you know, that's a world where black could succeed. From Jesse Owens to Muhammad Ali to Pelé, it's very important. You have a situation where the leading performers have been Black Americans from the various parts of America. But if you see, as Neikelle just said, on the reality who run the sport, it's still the same people. And Pelé was used as a very long time as a way to say Brazil has no problem. And we have a question from one of our Brazilian former graduate from the FIFA Master, Bruno de Oliveira Wanderley. And Bruno says, well, you know, discrimination is going hand in hand with police brutality. Historically, this is supported in a way by the government. How do you see sport being effective without a good political leadership behind it? I leave you the floor to answer that question. Thank you, Bruno, for this one.
Well, Bruno, I wanna answer a question in a different way, because this webinar is looking at the Americas and representing Southern Caribbean. It's very interesting that in 2012, a study by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights found that the problems of race was most prevalent in the Caribbean of all Americas. The study was entitled "The Situation of People of African Descent in the Americas." What it found was that it was very subtle. It was subtle between the Indo-Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, and the white Caribbean. It found that there was color prejudice. It found that most importantly in addressing your question, is that there was an anxiety by governments, by persons, to fully and deeply accept that there was a problem. The governments are made up or elected by the people. And from a Caribbean standpoint, if there's an anxiety to fully accept that there's a problem, just from the Caribbean perspective, then the government is not going to address it. And that is something that we need to understand, whereby even color prejudice, which is the most reported form of discrimination, occur in the Caribbean along with class. So it's going to be very difficult. We have to understand that systemic racism has to be addressed at all levels, not just government only.
I'd say, so Bruno, 11th edition, hello Bruno. I would definitely say that at these times we can be a little bit heartened as well by athletes pulling their governments, right? Sports pulling their governments. Just the other day, I even myself was surprised understanding the amount of revenues that in DC our sports teams end up giving to the DC government, right? So there's a lot of leverage that comes with that, that I think that we may need to lean into, because what the country does, especially as we can see here sitting in Washington, DC, sometimes a country does something that may not necessarily align with individual values. They may have made a decision based on an overall set of values, but in terms of certain things we're watching now, where people organize and they get things done here. On the sports side of that, I don't think you have to look even that far. You can turn to London or to England and watch and see what Marcus Rashford has done, to both from his platform, but also his ability to use that platform to organize, to apply pressure to the government, to extend a food provision program across the country, right? So I know what it looks like to have leadership that might seem as though it's oppressive, but I think when you get that moment to kind of exploit the true beliefs and the expressed intentions of quote unquote the people, then sport is in a really good place, both from a visibility standpoint, but also from an actual revenue leverage branding standpoint. And when I say branding, I mean a lot of people, Brazil might be known more for its Brazil national team than for the actual cultural and geographical and political landscape internationally. So sports has played a big role. It's played a big role historically. We've seen it with South Africa and apartheid. We've seen that where leadership may not in fact reflect the values, you can actually leverage both your sporting community locally, the influence that that platform provides, and then also your sporting community internationally to apply the pressure that's needed. And you should call upon your sporting peers to help to move whatever you need to do, or to make your organization more effective with the political leadership that you have in place.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that Nikki said, and maybe at the more simpler way. Now with social media, a lot of athletes and sporting organizations have been huge behind education. For specifically in America, in Northern America, where I'm from, there is actually, there is issues with police brutality, as we know, and also there is now voting suppression. So one thing that, for example, LeBron James has been doing since before, it has been putting his money, like he's been putting his money and his brand and his business behind educational programs by building a school in the inner city and basically being an advocate for things that are not, just pop culture. So he's managed to make education cool, and that kind of trickles down, and it has a domino effect, I think, with many other players that now are becoming more active in the activism world. So I think social media in some shape or form has been, I think, huge for players to then push to their government. And it kind of goes back to what Nikki was answering to the question before about each individual having power. And so when someone like LeBron James, empowers kids by going to school, so you feel heard. And again, it has to do with being validated and feeling like your voice has has weight, and you can be a catalyst for change.
It's great you said that at the end, because I think the equality of opportunities to make change is the basis. Where are the opportunities? And there are a lot of, for example, Usama Ali is asking, racial discrimination is existing as ignorance and poverty. And we will have to deal with that. It's an international phenomenon, should be handled wisely. We are one, no matter black or white, red or red. It's humanity. And he says, the power of sports can break down barriers across communities, and we remain deeply committed to removing all forms of discrimination from across the game as we love it, the game we all love. But based on what he said, one of the very interesting recent development on that situation has been, well, the relative hypocrisy of a small action, as you said earlier, and then the problem is solved. Question of schools, question of quota, question of percentage of possibility to have access to sports for kids. I mean, one of the major problems I have always seen from this point of view is access to the different sports. Yeah. One of the major difficulties in the case of Western world, the US being a fantastic example from this point of view, if you compare sport like athletics, basketball, baseball, swimming, and tennis, and you see that some of the sports are generally connected to a choice at school. And at school, if you're a black guy, they will put you on athletics, they will put you maybe on baseball. If you're a Latino, they will put you on baseball or soccer. There is clearly a predetermination at school. I mean, Geoffrey would certainly say that in the case you are living in Trinidad, if you're Asian, you will be put on cricket. If you're black, you will be probably put on football course. Family works on that. So these cultural deep problems, how can we solve it? How can we work with it? And I think that's an importance to make them clear. At the moment, we need to just put forward that there is discrimination from this point of view, and there is a need to open access to a lot of kids. It has to do with gender, but it has to do as well access to various sports to some communities that are really completely outside this sport. And if we see boxing is the contrary now. Boxing is becoming a lumpen proletariat sport in various areas, and that's terrible as well. From this point of view, I know that you all were very deeply working with that new work, and I would like to know your position on that.
I think it's very important when it comes to the sport and the discrimination to develop a conscience around it. For example, in Puerto Rico, it wasn't until recently football used to be a sport for rich kids, just like tennis, and then all the poor kids in poor areas used to play basketball, boxing. And I think once I went to college in the US, they were immediately, oh, you must be good in boxing or baseball. You must be good in basketball. And it's not because we're good, it's because it's the way society and history has made us play those sports, because we haven't had access to those other sports. So I think, especially with football, it's changing a lot in Puerto Rico, especially since when I was playing, it's the access that kids are having to football now, especially through the FIFA Forward program, has developed, but we need to develop a conscience through it and help those kids that don't have access to those sports actually get there. So it's not that they don't have any other option and they just have to go to boxing or basketball. No, they should have the ability to choose or the opportunity to choose what sport they want to play and actually have the resources to do so. And I think we should stop thinking, oh, Puerto Rico or like Latin Americans are good for one sport. No, like let your kids decide what they want to do and help them get there. And I think it's very important that federations and the government realize that and work around that to provide equal opportunities for all. At least that's in the Puerto Rican sphere.
It's also important to understand that we should not do one-off events, one-off programs. There should be continuity. So take, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, through our campaign, our Let's Play Futsal campaign, when you go into certain communities, you find that the kids ask you, are you going to be like the others? Are you just going to come and leave us? And that's important. That's very disheartening, because you find that many persons before have just come as part of the checklist, done it, and left. Going back to your point as regards to national and cultural, but in the case of Trinidad and the Caribbean, regional, what you spoke about, Pierre, that's racial profiling and physical attributes related to physical attributes. Where, as you said before, Afro-Caribbean athletes are good in sport, but more so football, where the South Asian descent are known for cricket. But it's known also that sometimes some of their parents say, do not get involved in sports. Why? Because sports will get you nowhere. Go into business, be a doctor. And that's very interesting. So we have to be able to teach and educate our physical education practitioners to be able to stop do that, and to be able to look at all kids and have kids involved in multiple sports on a continuous basis, and more so from a recreational standpoint and not necessarily from a competitive standpoint, because sport will be able to help them in every way, especially unification at that young age.
Before we move, one of your classmates, Geoffrey, Erica, just put a comment on what you were saying, and she said, great points being raised by all. It's definitely vital to consider the cultural and the national context and nuances to properly tackle a systemic problem that takes so many different forms worldwide. And she adds, it raises an interesting issues of cultural and national nuances and challenges that are global. So we continue on this form, but your classmates are really behind you and following what you're saying.
So a good thing that good word that she used, and I think we have failed to not mention yet, is the systematic part of all of this. So, when you say systematic racism or systematic oppression, we're talking about the deeper, ingrained legislations that are in place in America and other places of the world in order to have not just one generation or a couple, but like decades of generations of families that are either Black or, immigrants or POC, to always be few and many steps behind the white counterpart. So that is why there are so many issues now, and that's why we're pushing for people to vote and to change the government. And a great example is at corporate America. I remember a white colleague of mine one day coming to me and saying, Eden, I just read this New York Times article that talks about how if you are a Black person and then you have me white and we have the same trajectory, right? Like we have the opportunity to go to the same schools. By the time we get to actually to start working, the Black person is way behind me because that Black person doesn't have generational wealth from their parents, because even though you've been put in opportunities like in good schools, your parents may not be educated, whether it's literature educated, or they may not be financially educated. And so once, a white student, a white person gets to corporate America, and they can afford to take an entry-level job that is not, that lucrative. And it's just for the opportunity, right? Because they know that that's going to let them grow and get a career. But they have parents that have saved money to help them with their rent, to help them with other types of, comfortability so that their child can only focus on their career. When us, Black people, a lot of times we are the ones that once we're done, with a work day, we may have to get a job in the weekend because nobody's helping us paying our rent. And when we need advice about how to deal with the issues in corporate America, your parents have no clue because your parents have been doing like white collar jobs, blue collar jobs. you know? So when we talk about systematic racism, that's what it means. And even though she and I worked together for many years, and I would tell her, like, you know, I would give hints here and there about like my difference of, you know, my interaction with my parents, being immigrant, you know, like I would tell her, oh yeah, my parents send money back to Africa and my parents do this. But that never resonated with her until she had to read it from a white person that happens to be a journalist for the New York Times. So
if I may add to that, Ida,
yeah.
you're quite correct. And we have to look at historical and systemic racism. We have to. The same study from the situation of people of African descent in Americas by the Inter-American Commission, they found that in Barbados, which is not only common in Barbados, and I'm keeping it in the Caribbean context because not all sand, sea, sun, and fun here in the Caribbean, that in Barbados, it has shown that Black entrepreneurs have a greater difficulty in securing business loans and capital compared to their white counterparts. Sees a lot. How are we going to address that?
Yeah, and one, if I may add on that, and I give you the floor, Nikki, in 1 second. One of the major problems of sports is it creates the image that this parity, this equal rights is visible because they are on the pitch. The various communities seems to be well represented. But if you see a career started with the age of 15 and after the moment on the field, you see the equality is completely lost afterwards. The possibility to get a job as a director on a club, as a coach, as a sporting director is much more difficult if you're not white in many countries. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. Nikki, please.
Yeah, first, before I forget to say it, I would definitely love to see a FIFA Master project that is focused on youth sports post-COVID, because we hear a lot of times people say, oh my gosh, I can't wait for it to get back to the way it was. And I'm like, well, in youth sports, we know that we should not aspire for what it was, especially not here. It has become kind of who has more resources battle across sports, who can get extra coaching, who can do other things. So I would love to see that. From another standpoint, I think that this one is probably a topic that's applicable, especially to all of us worldwide, of what sports is going to look like coming out of coronavirus lockdown, etc. And I think that it's definitely important for us to kind of look at how we can impact a bit of making sure that what the first comment about sports and race and equity and access that I can't remember, I'm sorry, the first comment that came up for us made, we actually make that true, because this has been a gloss that we've had for a long time. Oh, sports is a land of where everything's equitable and whoever is the best will emerge. And
absolutely.
We're not remotely even seeing the talent that's out there because everyone is not able to access the opportunity to be seen. And so it's one of those things where we hopefully internally at our organizations can pull all these levels, because it feels as though we're in a time where we can accelerate the curve because we don't have to preserve comfort anymore. So when you want to bring up these uncomfortable issues, changes and such that need to be made, it feels as though now is the moment and we don't want to miss it. Now look, now may not turn out to be the moment, but we certainly will not wanted to have tried to make these changes right now. We have a pandemic, which means no one's been playing sports, nothing's been organized, all the funds have dried up. Why is there a STEM movement and an arts movement? Here in the US, we have a STEM movement focused on engineering, math, science, technology. Then we had somebody come in and say, oh, no, well, we need to have STEAM because art is so important. So we need to make sure the arts are. So why is that not now sports part of that? Why is it not STEAMs or whatever? Or whatever, something, but whatever, sports needs to be represented in that. And for us, we're seeing that school programs and funding are going on. I'm talking at elementary, middle school, high school sports are not being funded anymore. And so people are not participating or not even having that opportunity through public schools. Then we see that even in additional sports, there's a club that you need to join. There's a fee that you need to pay. There's, travel costs that you need to have in order to even get yourself to the chance to even participate in that sport, whether at that level or elite level. I'm hearing things about, and I've learned so much about ice hockey in my now new role. I even had, how would I call it, a hockey boot camp in Duluth, Minnesota, and I'm horrible at skating and such, but whatever. What I'm trying to say is, as we get to see more of this, we see all the barriers as they come up. Why is it that you would insist that kids learn to skate and roller skate or run and play hockey instead of saying, well, you have the talent to do all of those things at once. Let's accelerate your ability to explore this opportunity. So it's something that is made in our programs, and I think it's something that hopefully this group of us has a chance to make a change and to affect. But we do have to take the opportunity in this moment, both from all of the racial points that my colleagues made, and also to make sure that that's implemented in sports and youth sports and development sports and every tier of sports as we come out of this period. I think chaos creates opportunity, and this might be our chaos creating opportunity because we're all getting a chance to talk about this now. Let's try and come up with an action plan to actually try and make these changes happen.
Fantastic. I just can take every point of what you said. We had a question from one of your classmates, Kio as well. We had from all the classes so Pia Mackenzie from your class was making a point exactly connected to what Nikki just said. She took the example of German boxing, and she said it hardly get public funding, ever though there is public interest. Everyone thinks German only play football, while boxing is a sport where it's very mixed and it doesn't have a penny. That's exactly at the level of school to take what Neikelle was saying. Another of our partners, Calicia Gregoire, who works for us works for our partner at the University of West Indies in Trinidad. She says players are fined or ended matches bans. Can teams, clubs' deduction of points or forfeit be effective punishment, where the clubs will be affected overall to really see the importance of this issue? I mean, one of the key problems has been racism towards players. In some countries, they have been hard and they say we will do something, but it has been terribly difficult. How should we deal with that?
I had Mr. Kenwin Jones, who is a former football professional who plied his trade in the EPL. And then you also heard from Mr. Dwight York, Manchester United legend, who spoke about his issues as regards to not getting the coaching opportunities. Deduction of points from their discussion is not going to help at all. You have to hit the bottom line. The business of sport that cart has to be upturned. Clubs need to feel the economic ramifications of their actions in order for us to really and truly get the result we want. That's just my opinion. Deduction of points, really and truly, you have to hit them where it hurts. So I really think that the fines should be greater for clubs. I really think that they need to address their fans and deal with their fans even greater. And as we keep saying over and over, education is important.
Yeah, I agree. If I could piggyback on that, I think, again, the NFL right now, it's a good example that maybe FIFA could take from, because if the head of FIFA speaks for and against racism and for Black Lives Matter, I think that would help a lot of the players wanting to maybe educate themselves, of the white players, and wanting to even create a stronger bond between the white players and the not white players. like a good example to go back to systematic racism earlier is that in Italy, you're not given citizenship at birth if you're not from Italian parents. And so, for example, you know, that's systematic. That's in the actual constitution. Mario Balotelli, he was not an Italian, you know, citizen as he was growing up, but becoming the phenomenon player that he was, the Italian leagues, national league, pushed for him to get an Italian citizenship so that he could play for the under, you know, 18 teams and represent the flag, right? So how is it possible that leagues can do that type of pushing where they can, quote unquote, manipulate the Italian constitutions for their own benefit, but then there is no voice heard about, you know, where is the league when Mario is literally, you know, being chastised for being, you know, more rambunctious, you know, calling Kaepernick, you know, maybe he did not have, you know, the vocabularies and the historical background to describe why he acts that way or he feels that way. But I mean, Boateng wrote a beautiful piece, thanks to Nikki for sharing, but these are the things that the organizations need to do, and FIFA being basically the biggest organizations in the world, if they don't speak up, I think, you know, it's going to be very tough for players themselves to want to educate themselves or for the league to want to do anything.
In addition to that, I think something very important that we were speaking about yesterday, and I think it was Nikki who sent the video. I think all these organizations, as well as everyone who doesn't understand what's happening, they need to ask themselves, why is it happening? I think it was very, it really affected me when you mentioned it yesterday. A lot of people are talking about what is happening, what is this, what is that, but why is it happening? I think it's very important. And at least personally, when I'm trying to explain it to people or to explain why players and people might act this way in anger, it's because they don't understand why they're doing it, what has happened for hundreds of years. And I think that's an important thing that even FIFA, international federations need to sit down and think about it and then develop a plan according to that.
It also should be noted that we know that discrimination is in sports, or discrimination is an uncomfortable area. But Nick, Eden would have touched on it a little bit. We have to, the media has an important role to play in shaping public perception that changes from negative to positive, and we really have to be able to look at that. Additionally, let's look at getting from the Caribbean perspective. Even when policies are made in that of the West Indies Cricket Board that looked at gender discrimination, you have the All Boys Club in that of certain cricket clubs, well-known cricket clubs, whether it be the Queen's Park or the Georgetown, who still only look at having all male members. So discrimination, yes, we are focusing on racial discrimination or racism or racial inequalities, but discrimination across the board is something that we have to really address, even though it's uncomfortable. And the media needs to take its point. The media needs to take up the challenge as well.
I think also the person brought up a good point. Once again, I'm horrible with remembering whose name was on the screen. But I think it's important to have carrot and stick in everything that you put out to address a problem. So what are the incentives to do it? I actually just learned something here. I didn't understand that, for example, docking points as a stick. So call it, if I'm referring to a stick, sorry, I mean guardrails, rules, penalties that need to be in place, whereas incentives are more that, or the carrot is the incentive, more the bonuses that you're getting for both doing the right thing, as well as celebrating difference, as well as helping to educate the populace that comes into your sphere, so in your arena, on your site, following your team. So that's what I mean by carrot and stick. But I think it's very important that both are there. So what is it that, you know, how can we ease you into this, but at the same time, not waiting to see if you're eased into it, putting in the rules, putting in points or whatever deduction. I'm not an administrator, don't manage football, so someone else would have to figure out what the actual stick is. But there needs to be enough sticks that say, hey, look, you can fall in line with what our organization's goals are, what our cultural goals are, what we want for the development of our sport and the atmosphere of what people enter into, or you cannot fall in line, and here's how we will dock you every single time that you do. So in that way, you make it an opportunity for everyone to fall in line with a culture that you want to be defined a certain way. But at the same time, you're saying to people, this is not quite as optional as you believe it to be. This is how you are going to move along, or the world is going to move along without you. And since you are a part of us, you are going to be holding us back.
Great. I think for today we have to finish. What I would like to propose is possibly to continue next week. I would really like to have a point 2, because the issue is a very important one with a lot of demands, and we would like to continue to see the various. We try to look at the problem, but why not trying to imagine next week how we can find some of the current realities and possibilities of projects that are feasible to improve the reality. That's one of the issues. I thank you all so much for your participation. It has been a huge pleasure, and it's great as well to see that the community next to you has been very present in your class and in the people involved with us. Continue to subscribe, don't forget it. And I hope we meet next week, same time, for the second part of this of the same one. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Wow.